Hello, and welcome to this lesson of our C Programming Foundations tutorial series. I'm Reza, and I'm happy to have you join me on this journey to mastering the C programming language. Let's delve into the for loop in this video. We'll cover its syntax, how it functions, and its practical applications. Alright, let's talk about the for loop in C. It's a handy tool when you know exactly how many times you want to repeat a chunk of code. Imagine you have a bunch of envelopes to stamp and you know there are exactly 50 of them. A for loop is like saying, I'm going to stamp these envelopes and I'll keep going until I hit 50. Here's how it breaks down. A for loop usually starts with three parts in its setup. First, you've got the initialization. This is where you start counting, like saying, okay, I'm starting with my first envelope. Then there's the condition. It's like your checkpoint where you check, have I reached 50 envelopes yet? And lastly, there's the increment part where you move on to the next envelope after each stamp. In the code, it looks something like this. For int I equals 0, I less than 50, I plus plus. This line is doing all three things: starting the count at 0, checking if the count is still less than 50, and then adding 1 to the count after each loop. So, what happens is that the code inside the for loop runs over and over doing its thing like stamping an envelope. And after each run, it checks if it's time to stop. Once the condition, like reaching 50 envelopes, is met, the loop stops and you move on with the rest of your code. It's a really neat and tidy way to handle repetitive tasks in programming. Alright, so this piece of C code we've got here is all about playing around with numbers and their squares. What it does is pretty straightforward. It prints out the first 10 numbers, starting from 1 all the way up to 10, and right next to each number it shows you its square. To make this happen, it uses a for loop, which is perfect for when you want to repeat something a specific number of times. In this case, it's repeating the process 10 times, one for each number from 1 to 10. The loop kicks off with the number 1, squares it, which is just 1 in this case, prints both the number and the square, then moves on to the next number, 2, does the same thing, and keeps going like this until it hits 10. The output is neatly organized in two columns, one for the numbers and one for their squares, making it super easy to see each number and its square side by side. It's a nifty little program for anyone who wants to quickly see squares of numbers up to 10. This program is all about converting temperatures from Celsius to Fahrenheit. It's got an array called temperature Celsius that's already loaded up with 5 specific temperatures. What the program does is it goes through each of these temperatures one by one and converts them into Fahrenheit. It does this using a for loop, which is like a repeating cycle that runs 5 times in this case, once for each temperature. Inside the loop, it takes each Celsius temperature, applies the formula to convert it to Fahrenheit, and then stores the result in another array called temperatures Fahrenheit. After converting each temperature, it prints them out side by side in Celsius and Fahrenheit, so you can easily compare the two. It's a straightforward way to see what those Celsius temperatures would feel like in Fahrenheit, handy for when you're more familiar with one temperature scale than the other. Alright, so this piece of C code is all about making a square out of asterisks, and it's pretty interactive too. 1. When you run the program, the first thing it does is ask you, the user, how big you want the square to be. You can type in any number for the size, and that's going to set both the height and the width of the square, because all sides of a square are equal. 2. Once you've entered the size, the program gets to work on drawing the square. It uses a couple of loops to do this. There's this outer loop that goes through each row of the square, and then inside that there's another loop that handles each column in the current row. In each spot of the row and column, it prints out an asterisk followed by a space. This space is important because it keeps the asterisk from being all squished together, so your square actually looks like a square. 3. After it prints all the asterisks for one row, it moves down to the next line. Then that's what the /n is for, and starts the process again for the next row. It keeps doing this until it has filled up all the rows and columns, and voila, you've got your square made of asterisks on the screen. The size of the square, of course, depends on the number you typed in at the beginning. It's a neat little program for creating a simple pattern in a fun, visual way. Here is a code challenge for you to get more practice. Rectangular generator.